We've had a little bit of shift in our speaker schedule, so we're going to bring up Dr. Nikhil Rao at this moment. Dr. Rao is the psychiatric consultant at Randall Children's Hospital in Portland, Oregon, where he works with children with a variety of ailments, both physical and mental. He spent his career focused on victims of trauma, neglect, and abuse, as well as those whose neurodevelopmental disorders like autism and ADHD lead to their often difficult behaviors being misunderstood. He has a particular soft spot for the foster care community, which brings him here today, and both the children within it and the adults who rise to the challenge of supporting them. Would you join me and make welcome to the stage Dr. Nikhil Rao?
How's it going, everyone? Speaking a little bit early here, but hopefully I don't screw up too badly here. I want to start out by saying that I'm no one special, and I don't mean that as some sort of false humility. It's actually a really important point I have here to make, which is that I am no one special. Now, my relationship with Victoria and William actually goes back almost 4 years at this point, and at the time I was just a trainee. I was a couple months into my pediatric psychiatry fellowship, and if you know anything about the way medical training works, this meant I'd had a couple of months of exposure to kids, but basically had no idea what I was doing. But I was a fully trained adult psychiatrist. Put me in an awkward spot because she keeps bringing me these kids that no one can figure out what to do with. I keep turning to my bosses and saying, what do I do? Now, this is an academic child psychiatry institution, quite a good one, and this is typical for any child psychiatry institution in the country. And I said, what do I do with these cases of trauma and neglect? And they said, we don't know. But that's actually the mainstream. And that's kind of where we got started, was problem solving and figuring out what to do, figuring out how to do it, and figuring out what all the missing holes were when it comes to caring for kids that are victims of neglect, abuse, and invalidation. So I worked in Florida for 2 years as an attending physician and 2 years of my training, moved across the country where I'm in the exact same situation, where I'm 2 years out of training and looking for people to mentor me, and I can't find anyone. So I'm gonna just walk you through one day in my life. Now, I work in a pediatric hospital. I'm not in an office. I'm not even in a psychiatric hospital. This is a children's hospital. Kids that come into the ER, kids who get hospitalized for other reasons. So this isn't even necessarily a psychiatric magnet, but I'm gonna walk you through one day. Now, my day starts in the ER when a adoptive mother is there just in tears. Now, the kid had a blowout, a major issue with explosive anger, but that was over. That was over before she brought him to the ED. She was actually the one in crisis at this moment. She'd welcomed this child into her home with open arms after just 3 months old. She'd done everything for this child. There'd been weekly therapy, there'd been meetings with psychiatrists and services and case managers and everything, and still just could not control this child. And it wasn't for lack of love, and it wasn't for lack of effort. Sure, I did some medication management to try to help with this kid and some trying to get him into the right services, but mostly I was just trying to help the mom. So then I walk upstairs, I'm called to the ICU. That's not normal for a psychiatrist. You don't want us running the code. That tends to be a pretty bad sign. But it was a 2-year-old and a 3.5-year-old, 40% or more burns because they'd been caught in the explosion to their mother's butane torch that she was using to smoke methamphetamine. Completely unrepentant mother, by the way. And what do you do for a 2-year-old when all he wants is to hold you, but you can't touch him because the skin will just slide right off? What do you do? And I'm sorry for that gory image, but you need to understand what we see. Now, I go to PubMed to research what to do. There's nothing. There is literally nothing in the medical literature about what do you do for a traumatized 2-year-old. Not one paper. 3.5-year-old, no, there's not any papers for that either. In fact, there's one paper on PTSD and medication management for kids. That's it. Now, I'm pretty horrified at this point. I'm pretty overwhelmed because I've just had to watch this 2-year-old that I'm trying to figure out how to care for, but there's no standard of care. There's no research, there's no nothing. That means for what, the 70 years that we've had organized psychiatry, no one has said, maybe we should figure this out. But you know, we figured something out. I figured out a way to use an old med, a med that I know is gonna be safe in this kid, not typically used for this purpose, but you know what, we'll give it a try, we'll see what happens. And then I'm called upstairs, 4 more floors up. It's kind of interesting how my day goes from the ground floor up to the ceiling. It's a kid with anorexia. Now, I don't typically see all our kids with anorexia. They're there for weight restoration to get healthy enough to go to an eating disorder facility. I'm not an eating disorder psychiatrist. But I get called up there and I'm running the anorexia case list. Basically, if there's something else wrong with them in terms of depression, anxiety, or trauma, I come in to help with that to get them kind of ready for focusing on just the anorexia. And I say, hey, what about this new one? And they go, oh no, she's fine. She's like so mature. She's like beyond fine. And I'm like, that's not normal. And I run in there to go talk to this kid. Now we'll get to what I did with each of these kids later. Because again, I'm no one special. I'm just this dude 2 years out of training, trying to handle all this and finding out that no one has ever figured out how to do it. Mainstream psych just isn't prepared to handle these things. So anxiety and depression, right? Everybody here has either dealt with this or knows someone who has dealt with this. Anxiety and depression are basically just normal states of being that have developed to an abnormal degree, right? Someone without anxiety gets themselves in way too much trouble. In fact, looking back at my teenage years, I wish I'd been just a touch more anxious. Someone who never gets sad is also someone who never feels happiness or love or attachment or the real meaning in life. Now, that's not to say that depression and anxiety, when they rise to the level of pathology, are a bad thing, but it means every one of us is equipped to understand that, right? Now, bipolar and schizophrenia, obviously, thankfully, most of us have never experienced those states, but they're so biological. They're so something that happens to you sort of out of the blue because of genetics, because of chemistry. It's a really biological illness. Now, neglect and trauma, they're actually really different because they can be thought of as almost normal responses to really abnormal situations, right? And theoretically, no one should be able to imagine what it's like to be traumatized or what it's like to be neglected. No one should be able to understand those things. Thankfully, most of us can't actually put ourselves in those kids' shoes. On the other hand, what that means is that no one's putting themselves in these kids' shoes to figure out what they need to do. So I'm going to step back a little bit. I'm going to talk about the story of neglect, the story of trauma, right? So how many people here have seen human babies? Most of us, I think, right? I don't have any of my own yet, but I've held a couple. Human babies are pretty much the most useless babies on the planet. Even a blind puppy dog can find its way to the mother's milk. Even a blind puppy dog can burrow for warmth. A human newborn cannot do those things. Human newborns are actually not complete on their own. They form a circuit with their caregivers. It's like a battery. You need wires to hook the battery into a circuit. And without that other person there, has anyone ever seen mom face or mom emotions? Big exaggerated smile, big exaggerated frown, really dramatic voices, right? And I call it mom face or mom voice, but we all do that when we're holding a baby, right? And we're literally teaching the baby how to react to its own environment. We are teaching the baby what its needs are when it's upset, and we're teaching the baby that when I am scared, something will come through. Now, as this baby grows up, as this baby gets exposed to all these stimuli, the baby slowly learns how to control its environment. And then it learns, you know what? I remember back when I was scared and crying and mommy held me. I can hold myself. I can stand alone. I can stand up. A child who doesn't get this, a child who never gets the stimulation of even just a Playmobil or a mobile above their crib, who never gets held, who never gets shown the way, they feel completely out of control because they've never learned that. They've never been modeled it. Human babies don't just develop this on their own. So imagine that. Imagine growing up, imagine being 5, 6, 7 years old and having to wrap your head around this. What do? You lose your mind. You get angry or you withdraw and you hide. And that's what I saw with that mom crying, who'd been doing everything she could for this child from 9 months old. 9 months wasn't early enough to stop this from happening. Now, a lot of us have gone on to see kids with neglectful backgrounds, with attachment issues, go on to eventually be okay, but we all know that road is long and hard. We all know that it's often their teen years before that stuff really slows down, and that's with that constant love and that constant affection, that constant modeling to make up for 15 years of it not being there. Now trauma's a little bit different, right? Neglect and trauma are two different things. Trauma is something that puts me in fear of my life or puts me in fear of bodily harm, and then I am not able to shed it. So imagine a child who's raped, who's attacked, who's beaten, but then its caregivers either ignore what's happened to it, say that it doesn't matter that it happened, or maybe they're the perpetrator themselves, right? All too many of us have worked with kids whose parents did not believe when the kid said, I'm being raped, I'm being beaten, I'm being hurt, right? So what happens when I internalize that trauma, that feeling that things will never get better, that I will never be safe again? What happens when I have to live in fight or flight? I sit there, and when I go to bed, all I can do is dream about what happened. Nightmares. And even if I don't remember the nightmares, they're still affecting my sleep. So I'm never getting into deep sleep. My REM sleep is constantly interrupted, so I'm not forming memories. And I wake up completely exhausted. I sit there around, and I'm looking around, and I'm wondering what's going to happen to me. So I tend to kind of shy away. Anything stimulating, I'm stepping away. Anything that seems the least bit sort of out of the blue, I'm startling. And someone seems like they're just the least bit threatening to me, and I lash out. And it might be as simple as the teacher talking to me in a stern voice. But when I hear that stern voice, I think about the time I was beaten to within an inch of my life. We can't stop that fight or flight, and unfortunately, fight or flight literally turns off our frontal brains, the part of us that gives us consciousness and reason, and the part of us that makes us human. Our kids with trauma are prevented from actually using their higher selves. On top of that, kids with these derangements, they have issues with their stress hormones, right? So we all know, I get stressed, I get eat, right? I eat. Everybody's done that before, right? That's actually a normal response. That's the body saying, hey, you better prepare for this. Now, obviously, that gets out of control, but what happens when I can't mount a stress response? Then I just sit there, unable to cope, unable to rest, unable to recover. So to return to the cases, to return to these kids, these 3 kids, one day, not even in a psychiatric facility, not in a referral base, just 3 kids who walked into a children's hospital. The kid with the explosive screams, I said, you know what, why don't we go directly at that fight or flight response? Why don't we use an extremely old medicine that's been around for 50 years that we use in kids when we need to for things like blood pressure and even worse, opioid withdrawal in a baby, which is not my favorite thing to treat. Let's see if we can get that fight or flight under control and see how he does. Is it gonna fix him? No. But I could at least talk to mom and talk to her about the fact that we are looking at 5 or 10 years, but you keep modeling and maybe he'll be okay. I would love to say that she walked out of there, you know, skipping and jumping for joy, but at least she knew what she was getting into. And it's a real shame she didn't know that 5 years before. For that kid with the burns, similar strategy. What can I do to help this child feel okay? So I work with our child life specialists, the people at the bedside working with the kid to normalize their life, with our psychologists to develop a protocol to get this kid used to the concept of being touched. And to talk to the nurses about, you know what, it's okay that he calls every one of you mama, because what he's really saying is I've never had a mama, and maybe you'll be the one to love me. And that young lady upstairs, 12-year-old lady, came across as 17. And I said, you know what your job is to do? Is to stop being a freak. And she looked at me, look at me, I'm so mature. I take care of everything. I've practically raised my younger siblings. And I said, that's not normal. You're 12, you're supposed to be a kid. And so I gave her all sorts of therapy tasks during the time she was there getting better and ready for eating disorder treatment. And do you know what the hardest task I gave her was? The one that made her have fits, the one that made her actually break down and cry, was I told her to play with her 5 and 3-year-old siblings like she was 5 and 3. She didn't know how. She didn't know how not to be a mom. She didn't know how not to direct them. She didn't know how to be a kid. And so we talked, and she cried, and she said, wow, I really don't know. And I said, yeah, but you figure it out now, or you're gonna break later, because that's an important point that we remember with our survivors, with our kids who have succeeded, is hardness is good to a point. Anyone who knows anything about metalworking knows that a soft metal bends pretty easily. A hard metal, one that's strong enough to resist force, is also brittle. It'll hold up right until it shatters, doesn't bend. And so that was my concern with this young 12-year-old lady, was how do I get her to be tempered, to bend rather than break? How do I get her to not only succeed and survive right now, but 10 and 20 years from now? So yeah, these are the things, the solutions I've had to figure out on my own. Again, as no one special, as someone random with no real specialization in this and only 3 years in the trenches. There's a lot of push for trauma-informed care. We all see it. Trauma-informed education, trauma-informed care, trauma this, trauma that. Everybody is running away with that. Trauma-informed care is just awareness. I had an interesting interaction with a pediatrician up in Oregon where I work now. And he said, yeah, this is great. We've rolled out all this trauma-informed care and everybody's done the trainings and everybody screens. And I'm like, this is fantastic. I'm glad people love this. And I said, what do you do once they screen positive? And he said, well, we're trained to recognize it. And I'm like, great, but what do you do? Now, he's a pediatrician. That's not his job. And it's awesome that he's out there detecting it so he can get these kids places. But then where do you send them? And that's the problem. There are people who care about this. I'm not alone. And there's a bunch of us out there trying to figure this out, trying to solve these problems, trying to figure out how to care for these kids. Amy, who's back there, Amy and I actually worked at the same institution for 2 years before we ever met as the two psychiatric prescribers probably most invested in trauma. That's how fractured we are, is we can work in the same system and not even know each other. We need to build towards a future, and that's great that there's awareness here because, frankly, 4 years ago, trauma-informed care wasn't even a buzzword. 4 years ago, my child psychiatry clinic, not my personal one, but the one where I was training, I said, why aren't we screening for PTSD? And they said, what's that? So there's funding, and everybody talks about funding, and everybody talks about budgeting. And you know what? I actually get really frustrated by that. A couple reasons for that. First of all, part of the reason it's hard to get people into this work is you take a giant pay cut. I make less than 2/3 of the average psychiatrist, not even, the high earners. So I hear all this talk about funding, but on top of making less than 2/3 of the average person, which trust me, I'm fine, I'm still a doctor, I can't get the money to open up services for these kids. So I've never seen this funding, never seen it at all. What we really need is a network of people and a core competency and a direction. It doesn't matter how much money you have if you don't have treatment protocols. And I'm standing up here saying, I'm the top trauma guy in Oregon, and they don't exist, So that's what we need, is we need a network of practitioners that are really invested, not only in getting up there and talking, because there's plenty of people, even at my old institution, that were happy to write newspaper editorials and show up on the TV, but wouldn't actually see these kids. It's not about the appearance of caring, it's about doing the work. And so what we need is a network of people that are saying, I will see this kid. Like me in a children's hospital saying, you bring that kid to the ED and I will fake an outpatient eval for them out of my ED, which I'm totally not supposed to do. We need to develop an idea of what core competency is. And I can stand up here and say, I'm really good at this, and that's true, I really am quite good at this, but I'm making it up as I go along. What is a core competency? How do we operationalize it? How do we go from just me and Amy knowing each other and talking about this to turning this into something operationalized? And why are child psychologists and child psychiatrists not even required to have some basic competence in this field? We have 14 years of training. I'm sure they can squeeze it in somewhere in there. So one thing I do want to say is I've been getting up here talking about how it feels so lonely to be a practitioner trying to do this work. Let me be very clear. There are tons of advocates, there are tons of caseworkers, there's tons of counselors, there's a few practitioners, and there's tons of parents out here who want to get this work done. I'm not alone in that sense. And frankly, I've been inspired and buoyed up by everybody around me who is trying to help me find a vision forward. But what we need is to get that practitioner piece into place. This means, at the very start, intervention design. Like, we need to figure out, how do we help these kids? How do we make sure we're diagnosing them correctly? Instead of calling them bipolar or schizophrenia or some nonsense like that, saying, this is trauma, let's take them off the 7 meds. And you know what, maybe we do need to use a med or two, but let's make sure it's a good med and one that's gonna minimize their side effects. And let's not view every symptom as a med problem. Let's not view every symptom as a diagnosis, but a part of that developmental story, right? Because these kids are saying, I am the result of my story. My meds are to help them learn a new story, not to change who they are and not to provide chemical mind control. We need centers of excellence. We need places where people, even if they can't come there for care, can at least have their practitioner there call in. That person who's interested but doesn't know what to do. To pick up a phone, to call and say, hey, I've got this kid here. This is what I'm seeing. What do I do? And for someone like Amy, or someone like myself, or someone like any one of the few people I know out there trying to do this, to say, you know what, why don't you try this? We need people focused on that, actually building a care model around recognizing that trauma, neglect, and abuse are completely different from anxiety and depression, and a completely different competency, and something that is beyond just being underserved. Quick note, Mr. Sawyer, hope I got that name right, and Dr. Stone got up here, and they both talked emphatically about the idea that there is evil in this world. One of the biggest re-traumatization factors in my kids is the fact that everywhere seems to be pushing for this trend toward reunification. You know what, there's parents out there that screw up, there's parents out there with their own scars, and maybe they use and their kid gets neglected even though they don't want that for their kid, and they really are trying their best and they need support. Maybe there's a parent out there with their own unresolved PTSD, and the kid sets them off and they smack that kid in the heat of the moment, and maybe they need some help, and maybe this is a good parent who can do good with this kid. But there's parents out there who sell their children. There are parents out there who invite boyfriends into their house to rape their children and then mock their child afterwards. And we say, reunify. I've been in Oregon for 4 months, and I've seen 4 failed adoptions because DCF or DHS or whatever insisted on continuing visitation with the bio parent that did such heinous things to that. 4 kids who were doing well in their new homes with their new parents by choice, totally ruined. And that's just something I have to say. We need to call evil what it is and to push for reunification of the parents that want to do it and to not in the parents who don't deserve it. So I just want to wrap up by saying, the special people out here, it's not me, it's Will, it's Kat, it's the people who not only survive their abuse, but conquer their abuse. It's the people out there without training that are doing their best for these kids, and frankly, do way more therapeutic work than I do 30 minutes every month or so. I am no one special. Nothing I do is special. My training isn't special. I'm just some guy who decided to care and who used his 14 years of medical training. It's ridiculous that there aren't more of me out there, and I think that's where we need to be pushing.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. Appreciate your heart and all that you do. Andrea Sparks began her career as a lawyer representing children, parents, and adoptive families in civil child abuse and neglect cases brought by the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. After working as the Director of Public Affairs for Texas CASA and Executive Director of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Andrea has spent the last 3 years serving as director of Governor's Greg Abbott's Child Sex Trafficking Team. Would you make welcome to the stage Andrea Sparks?
Wow, what an honor to be asked to be here among all of you. I want to thank Governor and First Lady Bevin for hosting us from Texas today, and especially for the lovely yellow roses, which make us feel really at home. It's a hard day in Texas, but this is an important day, and we wanted to be here. And thanks to Mrs. Abbott, our First Lady of Texas, for coming along and being here and showing that Texas leads the way. So we've been at this for about 3.5 years in the state of Texas. Our Texas statewide Prevention Task Force for Human Trafficking had the idea of a child sex trafficking unit or department because we found that our kids were slipping through the cracks. And while we had services for adults and we had services for immigrants, we really weren't even recognizing the kids in our own communities who are being exploited. And since then, we have really been hitting the ground running, trying to build services. That seemed to be the biggest push and need in our state. And we've learned a few things along the way. We didn't just start out making stuff up. We actually talked to other states and got a lot of great ideas. So you'll see that this is the Texas model, but I want to give other states props because we learned a lot from California, we learned a lot from North Carolina, we learned a lot from Georgia, we learned a lot from Minnesota, DC, Oklahoma. We learned some from my home state. I've been in Texas 25 years, but I'm originally from Louisiana, and pockets of people doing really good work. And so I want to share some of this with you today in the hopes that you don't have to recreate the wheel. We are seeing some successes in Texas, and we are learning things. And as we like to say, we are living in this house while we're still building it, right? We're building this house while we live it. So with that, I want to share with you our vision and also our new mission statement that incorporates some of the things we've learned. So our vision is bold. It's pretty bold, but we know we can get there, and that is a state where children and youth are free from sexual exploitation. And notice we say sexual exploitation and not just trafficking, because what we're learning with our research and the kids that we're able to help so far is that these kids cycle in and out of trafficking and also engaging in survival sex. And they are exploited not only from third-party traffickers, but also by buyers who will exchange things that they need in exchange for sexual abuse. And so we need to build empathy for those youth as well. It's a trauma response, and I'm so glad that we had someone talk about trauma today, because we're learning a lot about trauma in Texas and a lot about what trauma can do to the brain and what those responses look like. We also are talking about sexual exploitation, including emerging crimes, technology-related crimes, like sextortion, which was brought up a little bit ago. We just gave funding for a sextortion-specific investigator in one of our ICAC units in Austin, because this is such a growing crime in Texas. So we are really going at it always and always learning about new crimes, unfortunately, that come along with technology. And then our mission statement I want to talk through a little bit, because, like I said, we recently revised it to kind of incorporate some of the things we've learned. So we've learned that you can't just throw money at a problem. You can't just say, okay, we need 8 safe houses in Texas, and we're going to fund them all. One, money doesn't solve it. You really need the right people, and you need the right training, and you need the right mindset, and you really need to think through what you're doing. And before we started, there were a couple of safe homes who got open and then shortly thereafter closed, because they did not anticipate the issues they were going to have. They weren't prepared for kids running. These kids are going to run. It's a trauma response, and you got to be prepared for it, and you have to safety plan with them, and you have to talk it through and be accepting when they come back, right? Know that they can come back and still get help. So to build sustainable capacity, we really figured out that we need to plan for what we need, and we need a variety of services and not just one type of service, not just residential treatment. We need community-based treatment, because some of these kids can stay at home with a relative or even at their own home and get the help they need. And by the way, they're going to be transitioning out of these safe homes and RTCs anyway into the community. Also, sustainable capacity means looking at our existing infrastructure of domestic violence centers and sexual assault centers and child abuse services. Because guess what? Child sex trafficking is all of those things many times, right? It's child abuse, it's sexual assault, and sometimes it's domestic violence because it starts as a romantic relationship. But child sex trafficking has this extra layer of very complex trauma, of being sexually assaulted, right? 10 to 12 times a day over months and sometimes years, and the extreme shame and self-blame that comes with that. And so leveraging our existing infrastructure of services and getting them to understand this particular kind of sexual assault and trauma is very, very important, so that our domestic violence centers and shelters and our rape crisis centers and our SANE nurses and all of that, our CASA, C-A-S-A is for CASA, by the way, Court-Appointed Special Advocates. And we have a great Court-Appointed Special Advocates program in Texas, that they understand, that our children's advocacy centers understand what trafficking looks like, what exploitation looks like, because guess what? They're already serving these victims. They're already serving these survivors. Our foster homes are already serving these survivors. So leveraging existing, enhancing expertise is critical for all the reasons I just said, and also because this is an ever-evolving crime. It's ever-evolving, so we have to stay on top of it. One of the first things we did when we came on is we paid for some research out of the University of Texas, and we were not prepared for the results we were going to get. The research estimated that there were 79,000 young people in Texas who had been sexually exploited. 79,000. Even after working in child welfare all my adult career, I was stunned. And also kind of like, thanks, Governor Abbott, for appointing me to this role, okay? By the way, he appointed me on April Fool's Day, so I don't know what that means, but 79,000. So that research led us into more research. What does this actually look like? What do these 79,000 survivors look like, and why aren't we finding them? Why aren't we identifying them? And the research showed us, like I said, that these kids are trafficked and then they cycle out, and then they go back in, and sometimes they are so desperate just to keep living and keep eating and having a shelter over their head that they're having to engage in survival sex. And exploitation is so complicated. There's so many different forms of it. We are seeing, because we're becoming more aware of it, and I believe it is growing, more familial trafficking. So families trading their kids for drugs or for pornography. We're seeing more online-based trafficking. We're seeing gang-led trafficking, and those victims might not look like the typical victim you would think of. They go to school, and they are engaging in being sexually abused as part of belonging in the gang. There's just so many different versions of this, and enhancing expertise about it is really important, so we keep learning. Also, just listening to our survivors. I so applaud Kat and your group for having a survivor advisory council in your state. That's huge. We need to do that in Texas. So that's one thing I'm going to bring from this conference. Thank you for that. We talk to survivors all the time, and I'm not a mental health expert. In fact, I'm a recovering lawyer. But everything I know about this trafficking epidemic is from our survivors. They are incredibly smart about this and strong. Promoting policies, this is huge, and not just legislation, but also policies within our agencies. So policies in our juvenile probation agencies that say when you come across a kid who you believe is trafficked, you don't detain them. You take them to get their needs met, right? You treat them with trauma-informed, and I will say trauma-responsive practices, because it's right. It's not just enough to be informed. You have to respond to that trauma in a way. So enhancing our expertise, promoting policies, and creating new and leveraging existing collaborations. That is the biggest deal. We have to collaborate on this. I mean, this is just the beginning of a national conversation, I think, among states about this. But collaborating within your state with your juvenile justice system and your Department of Family and Protective Services, your child welfare system. We have 30 existing task forces and coalitions already in our state that have been working on this. And so one of the first things we did was go to them and say, how can we help you? How can we support what you're doing to raise awareness, to recover these victims? So collaborating with our private partners, again, making it more sustainable, all of those things really, really important. And because of our size, we're a huge state. I mean, El Paso's how many hours from Austin? It's like a 9-hour drive just from Austin. So, we're just a huge state. Because of our size and the diversity of our state, from the border towns to West Texas to East Texas to the Panhandle to Austin, the live music capital of the world, and we knew we couldn't have just a statewide one-size-fits-all. So we are taking a concurrent approach, and we also knew we had to start. We couldn't wait till we figured it out. We just had to start doing things. So we started with really focusing on, can we enhance our statewide systems now? Can we look at the Department of Family and Protective Services and see how we can improve things there? So we gave them a grant to have their first ever human trafficking director and a small team, and they went about training the rest of the department on responses to human trafficking, how to identify these kids, what kind of services they need. So that was a win right away in our child welfare system. And since then, the legislature has now picked that team up and is giving them appropriations. Our juvenile justice system, same thing, really looking at trauma-informed responses to kids who are trafficked rather than punishment. Looking at our CASA programs, children's advocacy centers, all of those statewide kind of systems and associations that I mentioned earlier, but also our Texas Network of Youth Services that represents all of the child placing agencies and residential treatment providers in our state. We are partnering with them so that they can train all of those agencies in how to better treat these kids in their care. Because yes, we do need specialized services, but we know we can never build enough specialized services. And we know that there are a lot of great foster homes out there, a lot of great foster parents who could take this on if they just had the training and more support. So we're doing that as well. And then we also looked at creating regional continuum of care. So literally, we have a north, south, east, west, central Texas administrator. In each of those regions, we have a regional administrator from the governor's office, and their job is to make sure that every region has a plethora of services, everything from prevention all the way through bringing justice for that victim. And they're working really hard, and they're always traveling, and there's some big swaths of Texas in those regions, but we're gaining momentum, again, working with the task forces, the coalitions, and our other partners, including private partners, philanthropists, foundations, because we can't be the answer to everything. And when we go away, we don't want all this work to go away. And then we're looking at and starting to implement local care coordination. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but we're seeing very promising things with that. So this is kind of a visual of our high-level goals and strategies. Notice we're from Texas. We had to have a Lone Star. It's just kind of part of our deal. So we had to have 5 to fit in the star, but it's a very comprehensive mandate that the legislature gave us and that the governor gladly took on. So in all of these, we've got policies, but we've also got grant programs. We're very fortunate to administer the Victims of Crime Act funds in our office, the governor's office, so we're able to leverage those funds. I know every state gets those, and we're going to see a dip in those funds this upcoming year. But those have been critical to us building our infrastructure. Victims of crime, our kids in foster care are victims of crime, right? And those funds need to fund those critical programs to help prevent this child exploitation, but also heal the trauma that has come from being a child abuse victim. So protect. Oh, shoot, I'm looking at my notes and I just turned on Siri. She's probably been listening to me the whole time. So around preventing this from happening, we had a couple of strategy sessions, and we came up with a very simple plan, and that is every child in Texas should get prevention education. And the best way to do that, the most efficient way to do that, is to work with our Texas Education Association and all of the school districts to make sure that it's in the curriculum. There is existing required anti-victimization, anti-sexual assault, anti-child abuse curriculum in our schools. And this is an extension of that and should be. So that was actually mandated this summer, and we're working now with the Texas Association of School Boards and the Education Administration to make sure that districts are ready to implement that. And I actually have 2 Cracker Jack interns today working on a toolkit for schools so these school districts don't have to recreate the wheel. There's lots of good curricula out there. We're also bringing in Love 146, which is research-based, evidence-based curricula for high-risk youth. And they are training people all over our state to provide that kind of like multi-step, multi-session prevention education for our kids in foster care, in shelters, and runaway and homeless shelters, kids in boys and girls clubs, all kinds of sets of kids where they can really get down and really talk to them about this issue and about the protective factors and healthy relationships. And actually, someone mentioned earlier, not just prevent child sex trafficking, but a whole bunch of ills that our kids are seeing, right? A whole bunch of types of exploitation and abuse. So we're really excited about that and getting great results with that. And then on preventing this, we have to go after demand. Because if we didn't have people willing to buy children for sex, we wouldn't have this problem. So how do we do that? We are creating Cease Texas. So some of you may have heard of Cease. We had Cease Dallas at some point, Cease Baltimore, Cease Boston. We're creating Cease Texas. We're going to do it statewide. So we're starting in 5 cities. Cease is cities empowered against sexual exploitation. And in these 5 cities, there will be trainings for community leaders in preventing boys and others, and girls, but mostly boys, from becoming buyers, right, of commercial sex. So leadership programs for boys, talking about true masculinity and what that means, taking care of each other, having empathy, and having respect for all human beings. And also creating cyber patrols, so volunteer cyber patrols. Someone mentioned this earlier. It would disgust you to see if we pulled up an ad right now or created a fake ad of a child being sold for sex right here, how many people would come out of the woodwork and want to buy that child. So these Cyber Patrol teams they're gonna do that. They're gonna have these fake ads in conjunction with law enforcement, and they're gonna be interdicting and deterring would-be buyers and sending them messages about how buying is illegal and that they need to get help and they're breaking the law. And oh, by the way, if they keep trying to buy, we will be collecting those phone numbers as well. So turning those over to law enforcement. So we're really excited about that piece. On Recognize, we have done a ton of public awareness. The governor has been at the forefront of this. He has challenged all state agencies to require the watching of a training documentary called Be the One. And as of January, we had 100,000 state employees to see that video, and I cannot tell you the difference that has made in our state. People who worked at the state auditor's office are now calling in tips to the hotline, the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So it's made a huge difference, and kids have been recovered because of that effort. We also are rolling out a screening tool statewide called the Commercial Sexual Exploitation Identification Tool, the See It tool. And this is a tool that our child welfare system and our juvenile probation offices have implemented, and we've had about 8,000 kids, high-risk kids screened so far, with about 16% of them present as clear concern for child exploitation, and those kids are now getting the help they need. We love the tool because guess what? Even us experts, even people who think they know what this looks like, don't see it. And the study that created the tool said that kids who were being trafficked, that the people who created the tool have a program for kids, and they studied like 10 different programs for kids who were trafficked. It took about 2 years for someone to notice a kid was being trafficked before someone noticed. So we've got to get at our kids faster than that. Under Recover, we're really talking about recovering victims rather than detaining victims, giving them trauma-informed and responsive responses instead of locking them up, right? And in Texas, we were doing that. We were locking up kids because we didn't have anything else, and we really wanted to keep them safe from their traffickers. And I understand that feeling that law enforcement has. I have it as a mom of a teenage girl, you know? You want to separate them from their traffickers. But we're finding different ways, and we're creating care coordination teams within our children's advocacy centers. Right now, we've got them in Houston, Dallas, and Fort Worth. They've already recovered about 300 children in a year, and those kids, instead of being detained, are being given an advocate right away to meet their basic needs and start building a trust-based relationship, a supportive relationship with them, and are given a placement if they need it, or they're allowed to go home, and the advocate stays in touch with them throughout their time of healing. So up until their age 25, if they need it, with case management as well. And this is working. I will tell you, this is working. Law enforcement feels more supported. They're actually getting more of the information they need to go after the traffickers because the kids are talking to the advocates and feel like they can trust law enforcement. So we're really excited about that. And then we want to support healing, and that means long-term healing for our survivors. We know this is a journey. It's cyclical. And it takes a long time, and every survivor has individual needs. So not only, therapy and a safe place to be, but also long-term needs, like who am I now that I'm out of the life? What am I capable of? Where am I going to be? What kind of job skills can I get? And what do I want to do? Do I want to lend my voice to this movement? So those kinds of long-term supports. And then lastly, there's so much I want to tell you, but I'm out of time. Bring justice. And when I say bring justice, I don't mean just lock up the traffickers. We absolutely are doing that in Texas. In fact, Governor Abbott made this a big priority this session. So we've had lots of changes in our laws, mandatory jail time for traffickers. We've raised the penalties for buyers, but we've also streamlined the process by which survivors can have their criminal records cleared of charges that they were made to do, criminal acts they were made to do by their traffickers, so that they can actually find another way so they don't have to be in this exploitative situation, and they can get a job, and they can find a safe place to live, and they can clear their names. So bringing justice is not just about putting the bad guys in jail, but it's really about doing the right thing for survivors, and we are very, very focused on that. And Kentucky, one mind. I think Texas is in. So thank you.
I love what Andrea said about we're not going to wait till we figure it out. We're going to get moving. Many of you probably flew here today, and the Wright brothers, they didn't have it all figured out, did they? But they got moving. And one thing that I had never thought about before is once they got in the air, they had never landed before. They didn't have that figured out. But they got moving. I can tell you what they probably weren't thinking about. They probably were not thinking about flying first class, transcontinental, charging your cell phone in the air condition. They probably weren't thinking about all those things. But someone took their success and built upon it. There's a lot of successes that are taking place, and what Governor and First Lady Bevan are suggesting and are introducing is that we would bring those concepts together, and we would begin to build on it. And then further ideas are going to come into play, and further ideas are going to come into play, and build on those successes. But by all means, let's get moving. Can I hear an amen on that? Lynn Johnson has spent decades in public service, from working as a probation and parole officer to running her own consulting firm, dealing with high-risk youth, child welfare, and early childhood education. Additionally, she served as the executive director of Jefferson County Human Services in Colorado, overseeing that county's Head Start program, as well as programs on the workforce, career and family services, child welfare, justice services, and community assistance. Lynn Johnson currently serves as the Assistant Secretary for Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families. Would you make her welcome to the stage, Lynn Johnson?
Good afternoon. Can you imagine, I'm already off script, but that's okay. Can you imagine if every one of us went back and took everything we learned and started moving to action right now? How much we could stop, how many less victims we could have. This is a powerful forum, and I am honored to be here. It's a pleasure to represent the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families. And thank you, Governor Bevan and First Lady Bevan, for inviting us to speak to you today. This is something that's very passionate for me, but I don't know if any of you have had the conversation with the governor or the First Lady, but my first conversation, the passion from Governor Bevan was so intense on wanting to do something about human trafficking and wanting to do something about getting kids adopted. And he kept saying, and you've got to talk to my wife because she's even more passionate. So how can you say no when someone asks you to come speak? So thank you for this opportunity. And I am so excited about what we can do. I'm all about action, and I'm about solutions, and I'm about success, and that's what I hope we are all into. So let's do this, because we can do this together. We have some exciting changes that are going on in DC. So I want to share that first before I roll into more discussion about the horrors of trafficking or some good news about adoption and foster care. The Administration for Children and Families is embarking on a powerful strategy that is focused on people, not programs. You'll like this, outcomes, not compliance, and that'll enable systems to move people towards self-sufficiency and well-being with dignity and respect. Having come from a local government working in Jefferson County, Colorado, having worked in a governor's office, I was a United States probation and parole officer, sex offender specialist, so I had many, many of those perps we were just talking about on my caseload. I learned that the feds sometimes get in your way. Funny thing. And I also learned how to region hop so I'd get the answers that I wanted. If I wanted to make changes in my Head Start and my region said no, I found the region that would say, well, maybe you could do that. And then I'd say, well, the federal government said I could. I'm sure you all have done this. But the big difference now with what I'm excited about with ACF and what President Trump has charged us to do is get out of your way. Get rid of rules and regulations that get in the way. Make it easier, help integrate, and walk our talk. For the first time that I've ever seen, we have seen all of the federal agencies, Department of Education, HUD, SAMHSA, everybody. We are all meeting together to see how we can serve you bigger and better together so that we don't just say this is what we expect, but we're showing you that we're going to do it too. It is not easy. There's real time and then there's federal time, and federal time is really slow. But we are moving forward to do primary prevention. We are moving forward to say, can we help make families stronger so that when you have those evil families, and we do, we can identify them, and for those families who just reacted because of stress, we can help them. No child should have to stay in a family that's evil, but no child should be taken from a family that can be strengthened. So I want you to picture a new, completely different system of child welfare. Currently, there are over 130,000 children sitting in foster care, of which approximately 60 to 70,000 already have an adoption plan and families identified, yet they are still sitting in foster care. And they still sit in foster care, and they still sit in foster care. And many of the remaining children who have a plan for adoption are waiting for the loving forever family, but they may have medical needs, trauma, all of these kids have trauma, disabilities, or they're a teen who's acting like a teen. And whatever the reason a child is remaining in our care should not get in the way of intense efforts to find that forever loving home. And that is a charge that we are going to move forward on, because these kids, while sitting in those foster homes, are at risk. We closed down a residential treatment center in Jefferson County, Colorado, because the bottoms were getting themselves placed into residential treatment so they could recruit for their pimps. We have to watch that. We closed down a foster care home for the very same reason. So we have to help these kids. That is a safe way, by helping kids get adopted or placed into permanency. So we will be asking governors, nonprofits, faith-based groups, businesses to join us in eliminating the long waits for loving permanent homes. So as we move toward finding loving permanent homes, again, together, all at one time, over the next 18 months, we know that we will also be having a big impact on the reduction of the trafficking of these kids, because they're sitting in systems and they are very, very vulnerable. These children deserve this. These children deserve that we move to action. Now imagine primary prevention is working. We don't have as many kids coming into the system because we're strengthening families in a safe way. Current foster children are now in permanent homes, and those aging out of the system are being cared for before they enter any other system, such as the criminal justice system or homelessness. Together, by focusing on these changes in our system, we can have healthier and safe families and communities, and significantly reduce child maltreatment and fatalities. It may sound like a dream, but together, we believe we can get this done. We have an opportunity to end trafficking and care for our children in child welfare in a new, transformative way. We can move from a child welfare system that operates in isolation and does not produce the outcomes children and families deserve, to an integrated system of support that creates the conditions for strong and thriving families. And we know that communities want to be a place where children are free from harm. We all know this must be done. We know it is possible, and we are all here together because we know that. We also know that the work ahead can be difficult, as we're often disconnected from one another within communities and across agencies at local, state, and federal levels. But our commitment to this work is fierce, and we feel both the opportunity and the urgency to act now. I have never in my entire career heard a child tell me, or a family tell me that they want to wait for one more meeting, let's have one more task force, let's have one more group, before we start moving to action to respond to their hunger, their fear, or their abuse. We have an urgency to make changes in a very siloed system, and together we can make a difference, but we have to take action. Last year, child protection agencies received 4.1 million referrals involving 7.5 million children. That's not okay. That is more than 20,000 children a day. This should stop us all in our tracks, and it clearly calls for a change of course. Our child protection systems are overloaded. Our staff are underpaid. They are responding to the needs of families with young children that we know can and should be met earlier in our communities. Our child protection teams are working in perpetual crisis mode. That is not okay. Child maltreatment is not a problem that should be or can be owned by a child protection system. We have a public health problem that requires a much more comprehensive solution. The social and economic costs of child maltreatment rival every major public health issue. We must focus on the primary prevention of maltreatment before it occurs, while we simultaneously ensure that those children who have experienced maltreatment and their families get the necessary support and care they need to come back together to live healthy and safe, productive lives. And if they can't, then we have to take action. Only by activating broad cross-sector coalitions far beyond the Child Protection Agency will we improve child well-being and address the conditions in the places where people live, learn, work, and play. We have a collective role and responsibility to reduce community risk by disrupting harmful intergenerational cycles and by promoting family stability and self-sufficiency. These are issues that directly impact every agency, every office, every church, every organization, every nonprofit. These are issues that directly impact everyone, and everyone needs to come together and work on this. Turf cannot get in the way of solutions. By supporting broad community efforts together, we can take on endemic problems like disproportionality, infant mortality, and child fatalities. And at the federal role, we are redefining our role in supporting communities, reducing barriers to service, as I mentioned before, streamlining processes so that families can be successful, advance economically, and care for their children. We are incredibly excited about working together with all of you to advance this work around the country. The work requires everyone to get involved, and one mind can't think of anything better. We need to walk our talk. It's time to take action and to make a difference in all areas of ACF. We need to partner in a new and bolder way with localities, states, nonprofit partners, philanthropy, and faith-based entities. There is no better time than now to change the way ACF operates, and we need all of you to hold us accountable and help us make these changes. Increasing primary prevention of child abuse and maltreatment will have ripple effects in reducing other seemingly intractable problems like human trafficking. Human trafficking is a form of child abuse. It is a hard thing to acknowledge that we have had human trafficking probably forever. And we know that we have got to do something in the child welfare arena to end the horrors of human trafficking. But we also know that we have to come together. I was a probation and parole officer, and I love what I heard this morning when we heard about training judges, training law enforcement, training schools. When I was in Jefferson County, we required 20 hours of child welfare, human trafficking training, or you could not have a caseload. We have to start having that training, but especially in the public schools where they see kids all the time. I had a pediatrician on my caseload. He probably had 150 victims, and his priority was infant sex. When I took him to court for violations of probation and parole, the judge said, we're going to keep him on the probation caseload because he doesn't look like a sex offender. We have got to have an impact on every system, including the judicial system. Doesn't matter what you look like, it matters what you do, and that is evil that has to be stopped. Human trafficking is not a new issue. We now have better data, we have focused law enforcement, focused victim services, and we know how traffickers work to beat our systems. And yet human trafficking is still one of the fastest growing criminal enterprises in the world. It is one of the most profitable industries after drug trafficking. I tried to get better numbers, but in 2005, the Urban Institute estimated the gross weekly cash payout for a trafficker. In Atlanta, for example, a pimp's weekly payday was over $32,000 cash. He didn't pay any taxes on that. In Denver, it was over $31,000 weekly. And let me tell you, that is not acceptable. We have to treat this as a business. If there was no demand, there would need no supply. If we shut down the intake of money, we can shut this down completely. But it is difficult to figure this all out, and it is difficult to acknowledge all that we need to do. But I want to tell you a quick story about how I learned first about human trafficking. I ran Jefferson County, and I picked up the phone one day, and someone said, "Did you know you're running a sex ring out of your long-term care office?" Now, my mind went into a lot of places. But here's what happened. My TANF office was right above the lobby. My long-term care office was right here, and my workforce center was right here. I hired a TANF recipient to be an intern. She was working at the front desk, getting paid, and her husband, they had 5 kids, was looking for work, sitting in my workforce center, doing everything he needs to do in the workforce center. Child welfare had been called on the family several times. She had been told to take parenting classes and whatever else needed to happen. He was told, get your wife in order. He was so good. But what was happening is she was using my government computers to turn tricks in the parking lot because he was her pimp. Every time child welfare went out, she took the rap for whatever he had done. And so she had a pretty lengthy rap sheet. She had been married to him since she was 14. This was a long time ago, but I remember sitting there talking to her when this all happened, and she was so worried about her kids because she was going to jail. The sheriff had arrested her for prostituting out in our parking lot. She was 22. But had she been found when she was 14 or 15 or 16, and she probably was, we just didn't know it, she would have been given services, or we could have helped her. But at that time, there was nothing I could do. I said, could we charge domestic violence? There was no domestic violence that anybody could see. So at the end of the day, there was not one thing that I could do for her. She went to jail. Her husband, the trafficker, had the kids, and she took the rap. And at the end of the day, I said, this can never happen again. So we decided that we were going to really change how we did and addressed human trafficking in Colorado. And when I started working on this, I was told from some very high up political people, why are you being such a pit bull on this issue? We don't have this in Colorado. I was told, get out of this. It will increase our congregate care numbers. I was told, this is not your job. Go back to the Human Services Department. But that's okay, because somebody has to start something somewhere, right? And we had a great team. Our DA got involved, the state attorney general got involved, and we all started taking on this issue. Ultimately, we had every county in Colorado sign a pledge to eradicate human trafficking in the state of Colorado. We created a governor's task force. We changed the laws. We were having trouble prosecuting the traffickers because there were some glitches in our state law. So we got the laws changed. We started talking about how the juvenile justice system has all the victim funds, but the child welfare system is now required to take care and manage the child welfare victims of trafficking. We were able to work on getting the state legislator to fund our child welfare efforts. One person after another started creating the Army, and they're not done, they're just starting because it's not gone, and until it's gone, we have a lot of work to do. But we have got to do this together at the same time, because the other thing I learned, there was a really wonderful U.S. attorney in Missouri who was just prosecuting the traffickers, and they all came to Colorado. And then once we stepped up, they all moved to somewhere else. And I think we see this, and I see Andrea shaking her head. Traffickers are not stupid. They are brilliant. They run a billion-dollar business. This is something that we have to really remember. We are hitting them where their pocketbooks are, and they don't like it. And so they are getting slicker, they are getting meaner, and we have to step up. President Trump has made this one of his top priorities, and I am super proud of the efforts at the federal level, and I'm proud of so many efforts at the state and local level. But we cannot rest until this horror is eradicated. Kat Chon, will you raise your hand, Kat? She is in charge of the Office of Trafficking in Persons. She can fill you in on everything and anything that the feds are doing that could help you with your movements. And so I'm thrilled that Kat's here, and thank you. She has worked tirelessly to go around the country to help do and change everything that's going on with this. In the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act, the Child Welfare Protection System is required to protect and identify children who have been victims of trafficking. Serving and caring for our children victims of trafficking is no longer an option. It's a requirement. And we need to ensure that we have the training and the tools to do this. If your state has not acknowledged that trafficking is now a child welfare issue, we have to go back to the table and make sure those laws get changed. I can't tell you how many child welfare leaders have said, it's not familial, it's not us. Guess what it is? The law changed it, and we have to take care of our kids. The other thing is that the kids are already in our system. It was just under a different name. So it's time for us to become wiser, and it's time for us to step up. Andrea, you mentioned this, the demand. We have to address the demand. It is part of the business. And so no different than a business class that talks about FIFO, first in, first out. We have got to do something about the law of supply and demand. It is absolutely critical. To close, I want to tell you a quick, it's just a cute little poem, but it reminds me of what I think we're all trying to do here. And so I want to tell you about the geese. And some of you may have heard this before. But this fall, when you see geese heading south for the winter, flying along in V formation, think about what science has learned about why they fly that way. As each bird flaps its wings, it creates uplift for the bird immediately following it. And by flying in a V formation, the whole flock can fly at least 71% farther than if each bird flew on its own. Perhaps people who share a common direction can get where they are going quicker and easier if they cooperate. When a goose falls out of formation, it feels the resistance of trying to go it alone and quickly gets back into formation to take advantage of flying with the flock. If we have as much sense as a goose, we will all work with others who are going the same way that we are. When the lead goose gets tired, he rotates back in the wing, and another goose flies at the point. It pays to take turns doing hard jobs for our group. These geese honk from behind to encourage those up front to keep up their speed. So finally gets this, when a goose weakens or is wounded and falls out of formation, 2 geese fall out and follow him down to help and protect him. They stay with him until he is either able to fly or until he is dead. And they then set out on their own or with another formation until they catch up with the group. So again, if we had the sense of a goose, we would stand by each other like that. I'm committed, I'm all in. I will back you up. This is a hard topic, and it is hard to keep working on it without each other's help. So as Texas moves forward, as Kentucky moves forward, as Colorado and anybody else, we have to hold each other up. You get tired working on this issue. Let's not stop. We have to deal with the trauma. We have to deal with the traffickers. We have to deal with the buyers. We have to deal with the school systems. Every speech I gave in the schools, I found a new victim who came up to me afterwards and said, "You're talking about me." But we have to have those resources. We've got to know what, so then what? And we have to be able to do something. So thank you very much, Governor Bevin and First Lady Bevin, and everybody else that's here. Together, we can do this. I'm all in. I hope you all are too.
Dr. Krista Thomas served for a decade in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families and the Children's Bureau in both regional and national offices. Dr. Thomas is currently a policy fellow at Chapin Hall, leading their efforts to benefit children and families involved with or at risk for involvement with the child welfare system. Would you make welcome Dr. Krista Thomas?
You'd think I would have asked about the technology before getting up here. Fortunately, I think we're okay. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Krista Thomas. I'm from Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago. We are a policy research institution that's focused on using the best available research and evidence to help human service and community partners develop actionable solutions and try to improve outcomes for our most vulnerable kids and families. Before getting into my talk today, I'd first like to express my sincere thanks to Governor Bevin and First Lady Bevin for allowing me the opportunity to be part of this most important conversation. We've spent a lot of time today talking about the worst of humanity. And I stand here and my heart breaks alongside each and every one of you when we hear about the atrocities that are inflicted on our most vulnerable kids and families, and my heart swells in admiration for survivors like Kat, who rose out of the ashes and are becoming leaders to make real change for kids and families. My talk isn't going to be about that. It's going to be about the opportunities that we have to support the vast majority of families that are not these egregious cases, but really are folks that are struggling for a variety of reasons, who love their kids, care for their kids, and need a certain set of supports and resources to safely care for them and promote their well-being. And I'm going to talk specifically about the Family First Prevention Services Act, which lays forth an actionable policy framework to help us design and finance and support systems that work best for the kids and families that we're trying to serve. For the last year or so, I've had the distinct honor of walking alongside the Kentucky Department of Community-Based Services in their broader child welfare transformation, in collaboration with our funder and partner, Casey Family Programs. I'd like to thank both of them for the opportunity to be here today, but most importantly for the opportunity to work in partnership with them to strengthen Kentucky's child welfare system and improve outcomes for the Commonwealth's most vulnerable kids and families. In my 20-odd years of being in this business, I have never seen a leadership team more capable and committed to making real change, and I am proud to be a partner in this work. So the Family First Prevention Services Act, or Family First, as you'll hear me refer to it, represents the most significant piece of federal legislation to pass in 20 years. It passed on February 9th, 2018, and it represents the biggest transformative opportunity since the Adoption and Safe Families Act in 1997. Congress heeded the call of states, child welfare advocates, experts who demanded a new federal approach for child welfare financing that works better for kids and families being served. It builds on the momentum of the successes of the Title IV waiver demonstration projects that dozens of states, including Kentucky, have embarked on in the last few years to develop and test innovative solutions, to build evidence and do things differently and see if it works better for the kids and families being served. Family First represents a growing commitment to this innovation, to evidence-based practice, and doing everything we can to build parents' protective capacities to safely care for their kids and to avoid the irreparable trauma of removing a child from their parents whenever safe and possible, and to build community capacity to be nurturing and supportive environments for the families that live within them. Family First dramatically alters the federal financing structure for child welfare programming. For those of you that might not be as familiar with all the different federal funding streams, Title IV represents the largest funding stream for child welfare by far, providing billions of dollars to state child welfare agencies around the country. Historically, Title IV reimbursement was available to states only after a child was removed from their home, and primarily only for the purposes of maintaining the child in their foster care placement or child caring institution, and for the administrative costs associated with managing that case. That sounds really wonky, but what that really means is it was just available for case management services and for foster care maintenance payments, but not available for the clinical services to address risk factors that were contributing to the maltreatment, and it certainly wasn't available for intervention earlier in the case before the trauma of maltreatment was experienced and a removal became necessary. Family First provides for the first time the opportunity to think about investing in some interventions on the front end and try to prevent the child abuse and neglect from occurring and ever hopefully resulting in the need for foster care placement. Family First also elevates the importance of ensuring that children and youth who must enter foster care are placed in settings that best meet their needs and reinforces that point through restrictions on federal reimbursement for kids and youth who are inappropriately placed in institutional settings, and we'll talk more about that. But before we get into some of the specifics, it's important to say that Family First in and of itself is not the answer, nor do its provisions solve the complicated problems that exist in our human service systems. Rather, it provides a legislative foundation for state and local jurisdictions to continue to build upon the child welfare transformation efforts that have been in place for the last several years, and to keep working together to think differently about how we can best build systems that work for the kids and families we're serving. So, Family First, in many ways. It's just that. It's about putting families first in the development of our priorities, how we design our programs, and how we construct and finance them. We know that kids grow and thrive best when they are with their families. And we first and foremost must invest in an array of services and supports that strengthen families' capacity to keep their kids safe and promote their well-being, preventing the need for a traumatic and irreversible removal. And once again, I'm not talking about a small number of more egregious cases, but I'm talking about the wide variety of cases where we have families that are experiencing a sense of struggles, and how can we intervene to get them the supports they need so they can safely care for their kids. When removals are necessary, Family First reinvigorates the focus and commitment to identifying and supporting relative and kin caregivers as temporary or permanent resources for kids. For kids in foster care, Family First represents the focus on the highest quality foster care service, including national model foster care licensing standards. And Family First focuses on family as the first and best choice for kids in foster care, reducing federal support for children that are placed in institutions and group care when the kids have no clinical reason to be in a treatment setting like that, and for institutions that don't meet certain standards in their practice and services for kids and families. There are an awful lot of provisions included in Family First, but I'm really going to focus primarily today on some of the opportunities available on the preventive provisions, as well as the focus on reducing inappropriate use of institutional placements. So, reorienting around prevention, that's what Family First calls us to do. We've too often built a system that focuses really heavily on foster care or intervening after maltreatment has occurred, after the damage has been done. What Family First is encouraging us all to do and providing some structure for us to do it is to reorient and invest more on the front end before that trauma occurs, before that removal occurs, so that we can help families be strong and healthy and avoid some of the negative outcomes that we're working so hard to alleviate. As of October 1 of 2019, Family First will allow federal reimbursement for preventive services for families whose kids have been identified as being at imminent risk of entering foster care. Those services must fall within 3 service categories. So it's not an open book. They must fall in the 3 service categories of in-home parent skill building and development, substance abuse treatment and prevention, which we know we've seen nationally significant increases over the last few years. So this is clearly a priority area for Kentucky and many other states, as well as mental health treatment. By law, these services must be rated and approved by a federal Title IV clearinghouse and demonstrated a certain level of effectiveness in improving outcomes. What that means is there's resources available for prevention services, but it's really for a smaller amount of services that have meet a certain evidence level and have made it onto this clearinghouse. In addition, 50% of the reimbursement that states will claim must be for programs demonstrating the highest level of evidence. In addition to that, the evidence-based programs must also be provided within a trauma-informed framework. And we've heard a lot about addressing the trauma within kids and families, being trauma-informed and trauma-responsive. I couldn't agree with that point more. And that is a clear theme throughout all of Family First, including on the preventive side, which says that any of these preventive services must be provided within a trauma-informed framework. On the surface, this all sounds right. Of course, we want to be investing in what we know works for kids and families, but it's also important to say that right now, the child welfare evidence base is really limited. There's been very few programs that have been rated and approved by the Clearinghouse. The folks are working really hard to keep going on that. And while Family First represents a step in the right direction, we need to be committed to continuing to grow the evidence base, evaluate what's going on, and identify ways to be as flexible as possible in helping states implement and sustain a service array that works for the kids and families in their communities. Family First presents a range of opportunities for all of us as we think about preventing child maltreatment. It encourages us to shift our focus away solely from foster care towards efforts more focused on prevention, increased family stability, and increased child and family well-being. Family First challenges us to invest in what works and to disinvest in programs that don't, and to take the time and the effort to continue evaluating to grow the evidence base so that we have an additional array of options for kids and families. Family First commands that as a nation, we apply a trauma-responsive lens to the continuum of preventive services. This means not only recognizing the trauma of maltreatment and the trauma associated with the removal, but also the trauma that parents may have experienced in their own lives and how their experiences might be impacting their ability to safely care for their kids. Not only to recognize that, but to develop treatment modalities and approaches for responding effectively to that and helping build capacity to safely care for kids. And perhaps most importantly, Family First calls on us to think about the ways that we can partner more effectively across states, across human service systems, and across community partners to align prevention efforts. The child welfare agencies cannot do it alone, and child welfare agencies are part of a much larger system that includes sister agencies and community partners and each one of us. And we need to think differently and boldly about how we can all work better together to build communities where families can grow and thrive. And lastly, Family First presents an opportunity for all of us to scale up prevention services and shift our investments so that we are preventing maltreatment from ever occurring. Right now, we invest as a system billions of dollars, far more, after maltreatment has occurred, after removal has occurred, than we ever invest on the front end to try to get us from that point from ever occurring. The second key sets of provisions that I'll talk about are those that are focused on ensuring appropriate placements for kids that are placed in foster care. Family First also focuses on ensuring that kids and youth, children and youth, once they're removed, are placed in settings that best meet their needs, with an emphasis on family-based placements whenever possible. The legislation places a restriction on the availability of federal dollars for kids placed in institutional placements. We use terms like this, like group care, congregate care, residential care. To be clear, residential facilities have a really important role to play in the continuum of placements that are available to kids and families placed in foster care. However, the use of these facilities should be time-limited and reserved only for youth with an identified clinical need to receive treatment in these settings. All too often, we find ourselves in positions where child welfare agencies end up placing kids in institutional facilities simply because we do not have enough foster families available or willing to take these kids. And what we know is that kids don't do well in institutional settings. Very often, they don't experience great outcomes, and we have a ton of research to back that up. Kids achieve the best outcomes when they are placed in families, preferably their own families, but if not, in family-based settings with foster parents to love and care for them. Family First recognizes this truth and places a limit on federal reimbursement for group care settings. With some exceptions, federal reimbursement is limited to youth whose assessments indicate that their needs are best met in a residential setting, and the facilities themselves must meet certain standards and criteria. For example, under Family First, Qualified Residential Treatment Programs, or QRTPs, that's our new acronym, everybody write that down. QRTPs must have mechanisms for engaging families in treatment planning and service provision. They must have a plan for providing aftercare services following discharge, and like the prevention programs, must administer their services within a trauma-informed treatment framework. None of that sounds really innovative, but it's going to be a big lift to move a lot of our treatment network toward providing their social work services in that way. There are some exceptions to these funding restrictions. For example, facilities designed for youth and supervised independent living settings, for pregnant and parenting youth, and yes, victims of human trafficking or children and youth identified as being at risk of human trafficking. And we've all heard so much about the unique and specialized services that these vulnerable populations need. However, beyond these important exceptions, Family First calls on child welfare agencies to think critically about the placement resources available to kids in foster care and imposes some restrictions on the inappropriate use of institutional placements. But this is not about the money. Family First is not about the money. It's not about the funding limitations. It's about the opportunity and the necessity to create responsive placement arrays that best meet the needs of kids and youth in foster care. First, let's improve the quality of treatment settings so that they are best positioned to promote positive and sustainable outcomes for the kids that they're serving and to address the trauma and the other circumstances that kids are dealing with when they come in. Moving towards a trauma-informed framework, family engagement and aftercare support shouldn't be a novelty. It should be what we expect of our partners providing these services, and it's incumbent upon all of us to continue to think through the development of those treatment protocols like Dr. Rao talked about, and to build the tools and the resources necessary to help people be successful in providing services in this way. Family First is also about doubling down on identifying, recruiting, and supporting foster caregivers so that we have more family-based placements available to love and care for these kids who've already suffered the trauma associated with the removal and whatever maltreatment occurred prior to that. And this includes intensifying efforts to recruit, retain, and support kin caregivers so they have the capacity to care for their relative children. Many of them want to be there for the families, but relative caregivers need just as many concrete resources, supports, and follow-up as non-relative foster parents as they try to take on the additional responsibility with loving and caring for their kin. It's also about putting measures in place to ensure that our systems don't respond inappropriately to these funding restrictions, like diverting kids out of child welfare system into juvenile justice where they don't belong, or by assigning inappropriate clinical diagnoses to justify their placements. And we want to be putting measures in place to ensure this doesn't happen, and that all mechanisms and decisions are toward getting kids into the situations that are going to be most helpful for their situations. And there's also really great opportunities here for providers to expand their business models beyond brick and mortar group care. Opportunities to think about providing services for kids in their homes and communities, or repurposing campuses to provide residential substance use treatment for parents where their kids can stay with them, or providing services and settings to victims of human trafficking like we've heard so much about today. Then there are opportunities here to move into the future and to expand business models to think creatively and innovatively about what is most needed by the kids and families, and not to look backward, but to look forward, and to respond in a way and build a business and an array of services that's going to really help us achieve the outcomes that we're going for. Business models that have worked in the past may not be as relevant in the future. I don't see us going back to 8-track CDs, Blockbuster. I think we're in the same kind of situation here. We want to be looking forward and to think about the best ways to serve kids and families in a 21st century child welfare system. And that involves descaling group care settings, scaling up high-quality foster care settings, and investing in preventive services so removals become less and less necessary. So where do we go from here? Family First, while not the silver bullet and certainly doesn't go as far as I think many advocates wanted it to in a number of directions, does present a policy framework and an actionable pathway to help us think differently about how we can work together across states, across systems, and across communities to reorient around prevention and strengthen families, to build family and community capacity to safely care for kids and to promote their well-being. And while never, ever, ever at the expense of child safety, Family First encourages us to place families first and work to create a robust continuum of services and supports, inclusive of and beyond evidence-based practices, so that families can effectively care for their kids, meet their needs, and keep them safe, working towards creating a system of care that prevents the trauma of maltreatment and removal and not responding to it once it's already occurred, which is already far too late. So count me and count Chapin Hall in this effort to continue this conversation. We're here. Thank you for the opportunity today, and appreciate your time.
Eric Clark serves as Commissioner of Kentucky's Department for Community-Based Services. In his role, he oversees one of the largest departments in Kentucky state government with approximately 5,000 employees statewide and at least one office location in each of Kentucky's 120 counties. He is known for his compassion and determination to strengthen Kentucky families and work on behalf of Kentucky's children and vulnerable adults. Would you make welcome Eric Clark?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Get my mics in check here. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Krista Thomas again and the Chapin Hall team. I want to recognize Casey Family Programs, Dr. Zainab Shaheen and Anita Shannon, who are here, who have been just tremendous partners for us in our work in Kentucky and what we're trying to do to transform our child welfare system. I also want to recognize my strong DCBS leadership team who's here. You're in basketball country, and there's a certain college basketball coach here in the Commonwealth, after he has a big win, has a little swag, and he comes out and he says, "I like my team." And I say that a lot in DCBS, I like my team. I also want to recognize Governor and First Lady Bevin, who has brought this issue front and center. And working in the Department for Community-Based Services, I will share, this has been long needed. There's a lot of great ideas and excitement that has been stifled in our department for many years, but now, under the Governor and First Lady's leadership, we have been empowered to go out and do something special, and we're committed to making the most of this unprecedented opportunity. I also want to recognize Chris and Alicia Johnson as well while I'm here, and the First Lady's Uniting Kentucky effort. They've worked with the faith-based community here in Kentucky and really ramped up the number of foster parents and homes we have in Kentucky, so I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize their help in our efforts as well. So child welfare. It's been said a couple hundred times here today probably. What is that? I'm sure as you think through that, everybody has your own unique perspective from the issues you work on. But child welfare is complex, and it's very large. And we decided in the Department for Community-Based Services just over a year ago to put our entire child welfare system on the table and put a project management structure around it to transform our system in full, ranging from the few prevention services we have all the way to post-adoption supports and services, to kinship care, to workforce supports, to technology solutions, et cetera. We had 9 work groups developed to take on this work. We identified over 50 different strategies to take on to transform our system. And I share all that to let you know how overwhelmed we are. It's what we work in child welfare, a state of being overwhelmed and very much in the weeds, and I will not go into all 50-plus strategies, but we can sum them up in 3 transformational goals that we talk about and what we're trying to do in Kentucky. 1, we're looking to safely reduce the number of children in out-of-home care. I want to emphasize the word safely in the context of that goal, because this is not a numbers game. Certainly, if a child is at risk and in danger and needs to come in the foster care system, that is a necessary intervention. But once they're in foster care, how do we make that placement brief? And that leads to transformational goal number 2, increase timeliness to appropriate permanency. Right now in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, it takes a child on average across the state 3 years to be adopted. 36 months in a foster care setting and placement before they're adopted. It takes over 9 months for a child to be reunified if that's their permanency goal. That's too long. We have 9,675 children as of this month in an out-of-home care setting in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Now, that is a large number. It's certainly not anything I'm up here bragging about or proud of, but let me put some context around that. Back in November of 2018, Kentucky had an all-time high of the number of children in out-of-home care. It was right at 10,000, 9,972 children. So we've reduced that over the past several months, and that's something to be applauded of our good work and our strategies that are starting to take place, but it's still too high. Our system is overwhelmed. It leads to kids lingering in the system far too long, and it leads to an overwhelmed, stressed, burdened workforce. The average caseload for the social worker across the Commonwealth of Kentucky each and every day is 30. Actually, I take that back, it's 29. Here in Jefferson County, Louisville, Kentucky, the average caseload for the social worker is 80. And let me put some context around what I mean by caseload. One caseload is one family. One case is one family. And each family has unique dynamics and circumstances around it. One family may have 4 children, one family may have 6, one family may have 1, but when you add that up to 80 cases, we charge our frontline social workers with getting it right with over 100 people each and every day. So we're putting strategies in place to reduce caseloads and burdens and support our workforce. And one of the strategies we've got in place right now is changing the culture. And that's where this child welfare belongs to all of us comes from, is changing the culture and approach of our work. Our social workers need our support. We all rally around the reality of a social worker going off the grid in Appalachia, Kentucky in the middle of the night when a family's in crisis and a child has been hurt, to be that first responder to keep that child safe. But given the burden and the caseload that we put on them and the expectations we put on them, when they don't get it right, we out them. And we blame them, and we find fault in their practice, and we think for some reason that makes us better. That solves the problem. And what the culture of safety does is flip that on its head and encourages workers to share openly with their leadership about the struggles and issues they're having so that we can hold our system accountable without blaming others, because that has a ripple effect. Who would want to come and work for an agency where you're faulted and blamed for your practice? The best organizations, most successful organizations, support their workforce effectively, and that's what we're looking to do with our social workers in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Reduce caseloads, increase timeliness to appropriate permanency, safely reduce the number of children in out-of-home care. We've taken this message publicly. We've gone to social media. We've written op-eds to our state newspapers. We've gone to the news. We've held community forums. We've had a summit earlier this year where we were talking about this in a real transparent, open way. And I want to be very clear, as I stand here right now as the Commissioner of the Department for Community-Based Services, we are the state child welfare agency. We are not the child welfare system. The child welfare system belongs to all of us, to you, to us, to faith leaders, to educators, to law enforcement, to the courts, to the legislature, and so on. Healthcare professionals. And we have to start changing this narrative if we're serious about a community response to thriving families and safe children, and how we look at child welfare and we define it. We're also, under our Child Welfare Transformation Initiative, as Dr. Thomas just mentioned, we're going to be early implementers of the Family First Prevention Services Act. All states have to comply with this federal act by October 1 of 2021. States can comply and enact it as soon as October 1 of 2019. We've decided in Kentucky, under again the drive and leadership of Governor and First Lady Bevin, to be a good steward of this unprecedented opportunity we have in Kentucky, that we are going to incorporate this federal act into our transformation work sooner rather than later and be an early implementer. And one of the exciting things about that is an investment in prevention services. And if you want some shock and awe, I've shared a lot of data here about Kentucky. I would encourage you to go back to your state and examine these numbers in your state, because I want to share them for what they are in Kentucky right now. You know, you can tell a lot about individuals, organizations, and businesses with how they spend their money. A lot of values, value sets are identified and what they invest in. And last state fiscal year, which ended June 30 of 2019, Kentucky spent over $476 million on children in foster care. The other side, on the other hand of that, the Commonwealth of Kentucky only spent $18 million on prevention and family preservation services. Of the $18 million we spent in prevention services and family preservation services, 96% of those children remained in their home. It begs the question, and it's a rhetorical one, but what in the world are we doing? We have to reorient our system in a way to keep kids safe at home. One of the other things under child welfare belongs to all of us that we've done is we've reached out to those who've been impacted by our system. I've been in the Department for Community-Based Services for just over a year now, and I will tell you, I know the Governor and First Lady's heart for this, and it's been just the honor of a lifetime to serve in this way. And as I was talking to the Governor about this opportunity, one of my questions was, what is success? How do we get our head around this? And, how can I meet the objectives and the goals of this? And he gave me some profound advice that I've taken to this work each day. He said, listen to the voices. Who are those voices? And I decided it was important, well, I didn't, we decided that it was important to hear from foster youth. And you know what they want? They want to go home. And to be clear, home is a place that resides in your heart, a place where they're secure, they're safe, they're stable, and they're loved. Whether that be going back home or being adopted or being with a kinship, relative caregiver. They want normalcy. They want the opportunity to give a driver's license with everybody else they go to school with. And we passed legislation in 2017 to remove a statutory barrier to allow foster youth to get driver's licenses. We've listened to social workers. And that led to this culture of safety that I just mentioned earlier. But I'll tell you a story that is not told is the trauma of social work. I've done ride-alongs with social workers in rural Kentucky, been off the grid, and I will tell you there is nothing more frightening than pulling up in a dirt road with no cell phone service, getting out of the car and going up and knocking on a door and having no idea what's going to greet you. But I'll tell you what I saw. I saw poverty. Poverty to the extent that would probably frighten a lot of us. But I saw a healthy little girl who wanted nothing more than to show us how she could jump on a trampoline. Who are we to step in and take that child from the people who love them just because of their economic status? We have to reevaluate our approach. We've listened to foster parents. We've listened to kinship caregivers, relative caregivers who just want a seat at the table. They need supports. A value statement we have in Kentucky is we place with relatives and kinship care providers, family members, a whole lot. That is a good value statement and something we're proud of here in Kentucky, because when a child is in need, we look for family. It's a good value statement for our people here in Kentucky. Our families want to step up and take care of their families. But how do we support them once that placement's made? And we're looking at revamping a kinship support program to wrap services around them. So I want to thank Governor Bevin for his advice to listen to the voices. We've listened. We're still listening, but we're also responding. And it's led to this transformation effort. And the narrative is changing. When I asked earlier, when I opened up about what child welfare was, I wonder how many of you initially thought of a government agency. And that's okay. But government alone is not child welfare. We are all child welfare. It belongs to all of us uniting under one mind. Thank you all.
Thank you, Eric. When I saw the name Jim Daly on the lineup, I had a smile come to my face, because Focus on the Family has been something that's positively impacted my life and my family's life for about the past 30 years. Jim Daly is president of Focus on the Family and host of its daily radio broadcast. He was named president of Focus on the Family in 2005. Under his leadership and organization, has taken on a major role nationally in encouraging and helping facilitate foster care adoptions and earning recognition from the White House and Congress for its efforts. Jim is with us today. Would you make welcome to the stage Jim Daly?
Wow, it makes us feel old. 30 years ago. Hey, let's stand up real quick. You guys have been sitting a long time. So just stand up, shake it out. Isn't that nice? Ooh, now half of you are going to leave for the restroom. But I'll tell you a quick story while you're standing, just stretching there a couple seconds. We have a prayer box at Focus on the Family. We get about 200,000 visitors a year that come to the campus, which is, it's a big number. But the best prayer ever laid in this box was from an 8-year-old boy who said, "Please pray for my brother. He wets the bed. But pray for me, I share a bed with my brother." So go ahead and sit down. And oh man, I so appreciate it. This is music to my ears to hear what we've talked about today. Some of it's really tough. And Governor, First Lady, thank you so much for taking the charge. And I know this is personal for you and your own family's story. But we've worked in about 30 states around the country. We have not encountered a governor and First Lady that have the desire to help children the way you do. So thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm proud to stand with you in this. You know, some people would say, well, why are we doing this? I was a foster kid. That's the bottom line. I had a messy family. I am the last of 5 kids, 6 years away from my closest sibling. I was the oops baby. And my mom and dad struggled with alcoholism. My siblings were all in foster care before I was born. I remind them that our mother stopped drinking when she was pregnant with me. Thank you. Appreciate that. A little sense of humor. I just told my older brother that the other day. Remember? No. But it is very personal for me, and I had a great mom. My dad struggled, though, but I still loved him. You know, the one thing that I've realized, both being in a traumatic situation as a child, is the immense love a child has for his or her parents. It's endless. And even though my dad was a wreck, I still loved it when he rubbed his hand through my hair and said, "You're a special boy." And then one night, he had a hammer in his hand. He was drunk, putting holes in the wall when I was a 5-year-old, and I'm standing there watching this. I'm going to kill your mother when she gets home. Bam! Hammer through the wall. And my brother sent me into a bedroom. My other brother snuck out a window to call the police at a neighbor's house, and within a little while, my dad was handcuffed and taken away. And my mom stayed on the run to stay out of his grasp with 5 kids. And we were poor. We were that poor family. There were days I didn't have milk to put in my Cheerios. So what did I use? Kool-Aid. I do not recommend that. Just eat them without any liquid at all. But that was what we did. My mom remarried when I was 8. She remarried like Kat. She remarried a military drill sergeant. Why is that, Kat? He was horrible. His name was Hank. I called him Hank the Tank. And he used to do a white glove test in our house every Saturday. I remember one time I left my coat on my bed, and he made me hang it up 500 times. People come to me after I say this. They'll say, he didn't really make you hang that up 500 times. And I was such a naive 8-year-old, I did it. He was out of the room. He just said, yell the number to me. And I do it. 1, take it off, put it on. 2, and I got to 500. It took me a long time. But that was Hank the Tank. And then my mom started getting sick. We didn't know what was happening. And Hank would tell me not to go into the bedroom because it would weaken her. I'd wear her out. I'd use up her energy. Think of that. And he'd lock the bedroom door so we couldn't connect with our mom. And pretty soon my brother Mike, who was 19, came home. And he was in the Navy. And big guy, played football, 6'5", and he brought us each into a room one at a time by age order, meaning I was last. And my brother Dave went in the room, came out crying. My sister Kim went in the room, came out crying. And my sister Dee went in the room, came out crying. And then my brother Mike said, Jimmy, I got to have you come in the room. I'm thinking, I'm not going in that room. And I went in that room, he set me on his knee, and he said, there's no easy way to say this, so I'll just tell you, Mom is dead. I didn't know she was sick. And I just remember squeezing his arm so hard with my nails that he bled. That was my immediate reaction. We didn't know what was going to happen. 3-4 days later, we're at the funeral. Hank didn't show up. We were there. We got home. He had sold all the furniture in the house, and we had a few items in the living room. And he came out of the back bedroom with his bags packed, and he said, I can't take the pressure of this, certainly not having 5 kids, so I'm leaving. And he walked out the door. I never saw that man again. And I remember looking at my brother Mike, and he hugged me an hour later or so, and he said, Jim, I have to go back on my ship. See you later. And he walked out the door. Then my brother Dave said, I think I know a family that'll take us. And we went into foster care. My brother Dave and my sister Dee moved in with the real family. That is literally their last names. You know where this is going. And we were moving from Long Beach, California to Morongo Valley, the low or high desert out in Southern California near Palm Springs. And I remember coming into their house. They had 4 sons, 18 to 8. We had 5 kids, 19 to 9. So the 3 of us move in there, and the 18-year-old son that year, Dave, married his 42-year-old cousin. Come on! I was 9. I said, that seems odd. Mostly the age, right? 42 and 18. And then Dave, my brother, knew Paul Reel, and they were buddies. And listen, we were grateful that somebody wanted help. The father was on disability. They had 5 acres of land. They had chickens and grew vegetables, probably a lot like that home that Eric, you drove up to, or one of your caseworkers drove up to. They were desperate, and they needed the cash, and they got X amount for 2 of us under 18. My brother was over 18. He was 18. And so there we were in this home. And the other brother, Gary, he was struggling with same-sex attraction. He died in 1982, probably about 10 years later. 72 is when I was there. 10 years later, he died of AIDS. And then Marky, the 8-year-old. You talk about thievery. So I had 4 headless G.I. Joes. Pretty simple inventory to have, right? And I noticed Marky liked to take my toys and put them in his drawer. So my mother taught me right. I went to Mr. and Mrs. Reel and said to them, Mr. and Mrs. Reel, Marky has stolen my toys. I remember Mrs. Reel looking at me as a 9-year-old. And all of you have a heart for kids, but think of this. Mrs. Reel looked at me and said, you know, Jimmy, Marky would never do that. You're just not fitting into our family. And I remember thinking as a 9-year-old, woman, that is true, because your family is whacked. I'm serious. I'm 9. I'm growing up. If there's one thing you know about foster kids, you got to grow up fast. And I remember 6 months into being at the Reel house, and the social worker came out. She was a wonderful woman. I had my first puppy crush on this woman. She was a woman full of wisdom. She was probably like 24, 25. Beautiful. And I'm sitting across the table from her 6 months into this. And I'm thinking, this is a hell hole. Are you here to help me? My brother Dave, 18, sitting next to me on this side. And she looked at me and she said, we have a problem. I thought, man, this is awesome. An adult that sees the truth. I thought I was the only one. And she looked at me and said, well, Mr. Reel said you tried to kill him. I was like, what? And it was such an outward lie. I mean, some of you are going, well, did you? No. I mean, I'm a 9-year-old kid, and I'm thinking, what is his problem? And she looked at me, and I said, well, how did I try to kill him? And she said, well, he said you tried to push him off a cliff. And I said, but we live in Morongo Valley. There's no cliffs. I mean, it was that, like, self-evident. And she said, yeah, I don't know what to do. And this is the first time I heard this word. She said, we can hunker down together here, or we can separate you and put you in different foster care. Now, I'm the 9-year-old. My 18-year-old brother's sitting there not saying a word. And she looks at me, and I said, well, I like hunker down. I think we could hunker down because I don't want to be separated from my siblings. You know how that is as well? I'll do anything to stay close to my siblings in this situation. So I could take Mr. Reel. I'll manage that. You just find us something else here. So I lived another 6 months with Mr. Reel thinking I wanted to kill him. He would get up in the middle of the night and go sleep in the rabbit hutch outside because he thought I mean, think of that tension. It was unbelievable. And I was not trying to kill him. I was a kid that loved sports. I loved school. I found structure in those environments. I'd get home to the Reel's house, and I'd play outside, and then I'd come in and eat chicken that was freshly cooked. And then I'd go to bed like at 6:30, 7 o'clock. And I'd just lay there and cry. And boy, not knowing what was going to happen. My father, my bio father, showed up. And if you grew up in an alcoholic family, which is similar probably to a drug-addicted family, I remember my dad coming, and at the end of the day, he said, do you want to move back in with me? It was like, Dad! Dad. Which dad am I going to get? And my sister and I moved in. She was 17 at the time. I was now 11. And it was a tough year. And they had me tell my dad at the end of that time, when my sister turned 18, I was going to be with him alone. They wanted me to tell him that I shouldn't live with them. And I desperately, in my heart, I wanted to live with them, but it wasn't healthy. And so I said to my dad at a family conference, you know, Dad, I don't think I should live with you. Now imagine your 11, 12-year-old son telling you that. And he looked at me and he said, why not? And I couldn't think of an answer except, I said, well, because of how you treated Mom. And he got up and hugged me, came over, and he said, you know, I wasn't a good husband. I'm not a good father. And he died 4 months later. That was the last word I ever had with him. Frozen to death, drunk in an abandoned building in Reno, Nevada. And so where does the passion come from for me to do Wait No More? That focus on the family, that's it. It was born 10 years ago. In Colorado, we were able to get help. We were one of many spokes in that wheel. But we helped to get about 600 of the 850 kids available for adoption adopted in Colorado. Dr. Sharon Ford, yeah. Dr. Sharon Ford, who's here, was working for Child Services at the time for the state of Colorado. And we started talking to her, and she agreed to come and and do this nationally with Focus on the Family. We're grateful for her leadership. But again, all I could say that you guys, we can succeed at this. I would love to see a banner or an article in the New York Times, as me, a person of faith, that the Christian church wiped out the waiting adoption list in foster care. Wouldn't that be good? I mean, I think you share that dream. But it is, for me, it's something that would radically change the perspective of our faith in this country. I also add that people that didn't appreciate Focus on the Family because of what we stand for, and I get that, we're in a pluralistic society. We're just saying, here's our perspective on life. When you look at it, it's interesting. I remember I did an interview, a radio interview with President George W. Bush, and I said, you know, you sat in that chair 8 years. What do you think's the greatest threat to our country? And he said, well, most people would answer that terrorism, but we'll defeat that. It kind of shocked me. He said it would take 50 years. But he said, I think, honestly, the greatest threat I see is the breakdown of the family. That's our greatest threat in this country, and we have got to address it. So thank you, Governor, First Lady of Texas. Thank you for your interest and your desire. I hope that 8, 9, 10-year-olds today, someday, something will connect for them to say, man, the governor of my state cared about me. Because that is what makes a difference. It was a football coach I had at 15 who said, I care enough about you, I want to adopt you. I ended up living with my brother. I didn't want to break his heart, so I told my football coach, I don't think that would be good for my brother. I think it'd break his heart if I left him. So I'll stay with my brother. But man, that man made more difference in my life than anybody else. Why? Because he cared. He saw me, and he encouraged me. And to have a governor and the First Lady who say, I care about you, I hope those 8, 9, 10-year-olds right now today will someday realize that you saw them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. As I was thinking about this next introduction, came to my mind a story about a young boy that walked out into a valley to face a giant. You probably know the story. And just prior to stepping out in that valley to face that giant, his brothers had taunted him about his intentions. And this is one of the most powerful parts of that story for me, is the question that he asked, and that is there not a cause? Is there not a cause? Governor Matt Bevin is father to 9 children and currently serves as the 62nd governor of Kentucky. Following his service in the armed forces and decades of work as a business leader and entrepreneur, his family's experience while adopting 4 of their children helped inspire him to run for office. Working alongside community partners and dedicated public servants, Governor Bevin and First Lady Glenna Bevin have seen unprecedented progress as they work to reform Kentucky's foster care and adoption system. Would you give a resounding welcome to the stage, Governor Matt Bevin?
Thank you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you. I really genuinely am grateful to each and every one of you. First Lady Abbott, thank you for coming from Texas. This has been a tough week for you all. It's even more poignant that you're here. Thank you. To every one of you that's come from every corner of this country to be here, thank you. A lot of places you might have been. Kentucky's a beautiful place for those of you that have not been here, or it's a beautiful day out there. You might have been tempted to play hooky. The good news is if you're sitting in the back, you might be playing hooky. I can't see at this point, but here's the bottom line. You're here because you care. I just went through a cycle of emotions today as I sat here. I was outraged. I was joyful. I was sad. I was angry. I was encouraged. But I'll tell you one thing that I'm motivated. I hope you're motivated. I'm telling you, you can't help. You can't listen to the things we've been listening to without coming out of here in some sense of conviction that something has to be done. I'm the last person that's going to speak to you. We're going to have a gathering this evening, and it'll be a special evening. More opportunity for us to interact with one another, to enjoy some entertainment and some relaxation, chance to network and fellowship with each other in a pretty special environment. I encourage you to be there for that tonight. I hope that most of you will be able to join us. It's right down the street a little bit. But before we get to that, I just want to say a couple things. There are about 50 different things I'm thinking of, and I'll keep it to just a couple of them. Our journey was precipitated even before the adoption of our 4 children. More than 10 years ago, my wife and I tried to adopt an 11-year-old girl out of the foster care system here in Kentucky. I had never worked for a politician, never been involved in politics, had never run for anything, had never taken a political science course in my life, had nothing to do with politics. But in the course of trying to adopt this 11-year-old girl who had been in 14 different homes, she was completely eligible for adoption. We went through well over a year worth of all the things you all are familiar with: the fingerprints, the home inspections, the classes, the financial reporting, all of this over and over and over again. At the end of which we were told, you know what, you already have 5 children, which we did, who had been born to us at that time. They said it's better for her to stay in the system than to be the 6th child in a family, because she won't get enough attention, literally. And that was a rule that existed in Kentucky, and apparently had for some time. And I would challenge you to see whether some rule that is either the same or very similar exists in your states, because I would be willing to bet, sadly, that it may, and for no good reason. But I just remember at the time being outraged that here was a little girl who just wanted desperately to have a forever family. Wanted desperately to, as we've heard from everybody, there is no perfection, there's no perfect parent or perfect family environment, but love, stability, these kind of things, these adjectives that we've heard, this is what kids are looking for. They want somebody to be there for them, to have their back, to protect them, frankly, from all the things that we've heard. Statistically, we know what happens to kids who age out, especially to young women. We heard all morning and some of this afternoon the types of things that have happened, and statistically, that may well be what happened to this young girl. I do not know. She's a young woman of 20-something now, somewhere, if she's alive. It's heartbreaking. There's no good reason why this should be the case. This then set us on a motion that ultimately did result in us adopting 4 children, but sadly unable to do it in the very state in which we lived. And I remember at the time, my wife and I said, somebody should do something about this someday. Just crazy. I was not born in the state, didn't grow up in the state, didn't go to school in the state. It's crazy how God works. It really is. So we found ourselves in this situation, in a position to be able to do something about this. One of the sad realities is, what I applaud about Texas, Governor Abbott, his team, and there's others as well. I start naming names, I'll be remiss and leave some out, but there are others. What I applaud about others who care about this is they've done what we've done, which is do something for which there's no political constituency, which is why these things get ignored. You lift up some of these rocks and you're not going to be well rewarded by what you find under there. You're going to have cost, and you're going to have finger pointing, you're going to have shock and outrage and blame being laid. It's just better to leave the rock lying there. Hope that something doesn't come out from under it on your watch. It's unacceptable. 500,000 kids in foster care, and the comment was made earlier, and it is so true, that we spend billions and billions and billions, and over generations have spent trillions of dollars trying to put broken adults back together again. Trying to put broken adults back together again as they come out of addiction, as they come out of prison, as they come out of abusive relationships, as they come out of government care, whatever the case might be. And we spend so much money when 70% of all the people that are in prison, for example, in America, have been at some point or another in the foster care system. 81% of the people on death row came out of the foster care system. You heard the mention by Eric Clark about the cost here in Kentucky, and proportionally it's probably the same in your states. We spend about $50,000 a year for every child that's in foster care in Kentucky, $50,000. And yet we're failing them. And it's the same in every state. With all due respect to every one of us, no one of us at any level has figured this out yet, which is the whole purpose behind this. We can do this. It's not going to be easy. Thomas Edison, the guy that invented the lights that are currently burning my retinas, that guy said that most people in life miss opportunity because it usually shows up in overalls and looks like hard work. That's the truth. This is going to be hard work. But I'll tell you what, there's a lot of overall wearing people that have been across this stage today. There's a whole lot of more overall wearing people that are out here. I want to close with just a couple of thoughts. I was struck by several things. There's something on the, and actually, I may have more time than I thought. I thought I was trying to be tight here. I just noticed a little clock here counting down. Let me just say a couple of things real quickly. The real thing we have to ask ourselves is what we do when we leave here. And before I get to that final thought, I want to just say a couple things that have come through my mind as I've listened. 1 + 1 can equal more than 2. It truly can. There's a lot of ones in this room. How do we string ourselves together? If I tried to quote it, I would mess it up, but there's a verse in scriptures that talks about 1 thread, 2 thread, and 3 threads or strands. It's easy to break 1 strand. 2 is a little bit tougher, hard, but not too difficult to unwind. But you get 3 or more strands together, that is a tough thing to break. This is what we are. We're a room full of strands. We can weave ourselves together in some pretty extraordinary ways. Now, I'll tell you what, some of the things that, again, and I say it just because we heard from them, but some of the things that Texas has done with legislation and with the structure they're already putting in place are things that every single state in America could work to replicate. And I applaud you for this. I truly do. I'm grateful to you for being able to share that and for being a resource. I love the fact that this isn't a zero-sum game. It's not if this state gets credit, that state doesn't, or if this foundation does, that foundation doesn't. We're all in this together. And I've thought to myself, what has made this so difficult? It is that the system is broken. I was speaking to a family court judge from here in Kentucky during the lunch break. I'm grateful if you're still here. He was in the back somewhere. I'm grateful for you being here. I appreciate the fact that you care about this, but I'm telling you what, in every one of our states, from the federal level all the way down to the localist level of all, we have a broken judicial system that is not in line with what is best for children. We are so concerned often about not getting anyone in trouble or holding people, responsible for things if something goes wrong, again, to give ourselves the impression that we have fixed it or done something right. When in reality, we're not putting the child first. The child needs to come first above everything else. Above everything else. What is in the best interest of that child? And it's going to require a massive restructuring of the way everything works, from the judges and the guardian ad litems and the foster care system and the ways in which people are incentivized. And let's be honest, when you're paying $50,000 per child and we're not doing well by them, because we know that when they age out at the age of 18, by the time they're 19, 31 will have been arrested for something. More than 50% of those kids that age out will end up homeless for some or significant portions of their lives. That 54% will never graduate from high school or even get a GED. We know these facts to be true, that for women it's almost a statistical given. They'll be trafficked, they'll be abused, they'll be in abusive relationships, they'll live in poverty, they'll have children that will grow up in a cycle of poverty and abuse. We know these things to be true, and we're paying $50,000 a year to produce that, and then billions more trying to fix it and put it back together. We know that conservatively the cost of a child who ages out of foster care on the kind of services provided by these various public entities is over $300,000 per person over the course of their life. That's probably conservative. We can't afford not to do something, even if you only look at this from a financial standpoint. But when you think about it from an emotional and a psychological and a communal and a familial standpoint, we can't afford a societal standpoint. We can't afford it. We cannot afford to keep getting this wrong. That is the whole point of this. Nothing would make me happier than to see out of this come something that's replicable, that we can plug and play, that we can scale something up. We're not going to figure it all out today or tomorrow or next week or next month or even next year or maybe not even in the next decade. But I'm telling you what, the comment's been made by several. Action. What's the difference between every kid who starts out as a dreamer wanting to be an astronaut or a firefighter or whatever, and many do become these things, but most do not? Every kid thinks they can be everything. Everybody dreams from a young age. What's the difference between when someone looks back over time at somebody who was a kid dreaming and somebody that people see as a visionary? It's action. There's plenty of people who go through their life doing nothing but dreaming. I applaud you for being here to take action. I thank you for taking action. It does only sometimes take 5 little stones. It takes sometimes some simple little ingredients. But it takes people stepping up, stepping in, continuing to live in the house while it's still being built. These kind of things, or continuing to build while you live there, whichever side of it you want to look at. I want to leave you with a couple final quick thoughts. I asked to have a little video clip put together. I'm going to show you in 1 second. It's just a short clip of a longer one where I was asked, I was sitting in a conference at a think tank in Washington talking about adoption and foster care. And somebody tried to zing me with a gun control question that was sort of meant to be a gotcha. In that video, I was struck by something. There was nothing I said in it that was particularly brilliant or novel or innovative necessarily. But there was something about it that resonated with people. In that little video, which was fairly uncharismatic and was about 7 minutes long and typically is not something people would care to watch, some politician talk about anything for 7 minutes, let alone that, has somehow been shared and watched more than 50 million times. That's just that I'm aware of. And it's been, it'll go on this page and get 10 million, 20 million, 8 million, 3 million, 5 million. And I want to show you one tiny little clip of it only because this is a tiny subset of what I said, which was sort of a stream of consciousness in response to a question I wasn't anticipating. But what you're going to see is something that you're going to be faced with, and I want to encourage you. If you were to Google up my name followed by the word cell phone, or my name followed by the name video game, or my name followed by something of that sort, you would find article after article after article of ridicule, mockery, led largely by papers and people from this town we're in right now. People will challenge and mock and ridicule you. It is not so much, although we've heard the results of a lot of immoral activity, it is not so much a function of the fact that we are an immoral society as we have become increasingly an amoral society. And we have a cultural problem. Just run that real quick if you could. And then if you're so inclined, I'd encourage you to watch the longer thing. We don't value human life like we did. We remove increasingly respect for the dignity of other people. You look at how rampant pornography is, the degradation and disrespect for women and for human life in general. It is so systemic. People of our age have not been exposed like our children have been. There's not a child in America that hasn't been exposed to pornography, I guarantee you, if they're above the age of 12. That's a fact. It is so systemic, it's horrific. And it desensitizes us at every turn. This article in The Atlantic talks about how young people are increasingly becoming suicidal and depressed because of the use of social media and the use of these personal devices and on-screen time. All these are part of a cultural issue. In this cultural issue, if we're not addressing it, we are kidding ourselves because it also affects this issue we came here to talk about today. We don't value human life. By something that Jim shared about his conversation with President Bush and the degradation, the breakdown of the American family. I agree completely. And I'll close with this, because related to all that, I would challenge you to think that there's one other thing that is a big problem for us as it relates to this breakdown in the family and the abdication of us as adults at every level, parents, pastors, foundation members, government employees, those of us in positions of influence, scout leaders, teachers, whoever, coaches, those of us in positions of influence and leadership have increasingly abdicated our responsibility, that which people generations before us took, to enforce within us opportunities and reinstill values within us and to encourage those things. And now we've sort of washed our hands of it for a variety of reasons. We've either given it over to government, or we've assumed someone else will take care of it, or we don't want to rock the boat, or we don't want to have people saying, who do you think you are to think you're in charge of this or that, or don't let your opinion be heard. And we've allowed ourselves to be shut down and shut up. And it's time we start to speak up, frankly. It really is. But I would encourage you to think about this. What has led to this cultural decline? It's what I would, if I were asked, what I fear the most for America. It's our apathy. It's our apathy. We are so blessed. We have it so good. This meal we had at lunchtime, this environment we've been in, with the climate controls and the comfortable seats and the beautiful flowers and the setting, 99% of the people that will ever live in the history of the world, past, present, or future, will never in their lives experience a single day like the day and the evening that we are going to have today. We have it so good. We are so blessed in this country in the 21st century that we can afford not to care. That's our greatest threat. We can afford literally to not care, and it truly doesn't seem to have any immediate impact on our life. Our life goes on, the food's still there, quality of life is still there. Yeah, there's problems that someone else is taking care of that because we got so much, I'm sure someone's got it covered. Our greatest threat is our apathy. So I'll leave you with a question. You say you want to do something for the children of America that are slipping through the cracks, the children in our foster care system, the children who want desperately to be adopted, the children who are being exploited and sexually abused. How badly do you want it?
Thank you, Governor. The Governor and First Lady would like to invite each of you to attend a gala this evening at the Fraser History Museum. There'll be shuttle departures that will begin at 5 p.m., I'm told. And it is a formal black tie event. And this does conclude this event for today. And please make plans to join us this evening. God bless each and every one of you. Yeah, the Governor. There you have it. I love him. Amen. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.